So you decided to get your first place. Great. Now where do you start? I bet that's the question you'll be asking yourself at the moment. This video is broken down to 7 easy steps to answer that question. Now let's jump into the first one, planning and budgeting. This step is the most crucial one in my opinion. It'll lay the groundwork of how smooth the transaction is going to be in the future. Now to make it easy on you, let's talk about the biggest hurdle you're going to face, down payments. Now for down payments, you'll have to budget based on the purchase price of the house. Then you'll need 5% for the first $500,000, 10% for $500,000 to $1 million, and 20% for anything above $1 million. Now to give you an example, if you're buying a house for $750,000, you'll need the 5% for the first $500,000 and 10% for anything above, which is another $25,000. This brings up a down payment of $50,000 if you plan on buying a house for $750,000. And to be strategic about saving for your down payment for your first house, make sure to tap into your RSP, which has a withdrawal limit of $35,000, and also your FHSA. Now I also want to take a moment to talk about any additional expenses which you may incur, also known as closing cost. This is typically 1.5% to 2% of the purchase price. Let me break it down for you. Inspections can cost anywhere between $500 and $600. Appraisals can cost $500 depending on your lender's requirements. Moving expenses can cost $500 to $1,500 depending on how far you're moving. Lawyers can charge anywhere between $2,500 to $3,000. Now the biggest closing cost you'll have to factor in would be land transfer tax. In Ontario, you have a rebate of $4,000 when it comes to land transfer tax. That is good up until $400,000 if you live in Toronto and $368,000 if you live in Ottawa like I do. Now this is an example of the tax rate you might be incurring. Let's take the same example of $750,000. The land transfer tax would come up to around $11,475, out of which $4,000 would be a rebate. The balance would be $7,475, which you will have to budget for. So that's something to keep in mind when you're planning. It's also good practice to have another $1,000 to $2,000 of miscellaneous expenses, as you never know if something might come up, or you might need a specialized inspection. Now let's take a look at the next step, finding a mortgage agent and getting a pre-approval. It's up to you to decide who you'd like to go with. I would recommend going with a mortgage agent or a mortgage broker, as they have access to multiple lenders and can give you a wide variety of options. Now a great mortgage agent will prepare you for everything which is about to come, from going through terms, amortization, interest rates, pre-qualification, and a whole lot more. They'll also go through all your financial details to narrow down your affordability. Once that's done, they will pre-approve you and give you a rough purchase price. This takes us to step 3, finding a realtor. Now if you don't already have one, then I would recommend asking your friends and family who've already bought a house if they recommend theirs. If not, then I would recommend interviewing a few realtors to see if they're the right fit for you. Now, something to look out for when finding a realtor is to see which field they specialize in. A lot of realtors will only do condos or just residential, or they will only be locked into one area. And if you are planning to buy or sell in the Ottawa region, then make sure to reach out in the description down below to book an appointment with me. Now this brings us to the most exciting step, house hunting. Now hopefully your realtor set up a great search list during the consultation meeting and you've been getting consistent property alerts to your liking. Keep in mind, communication is key here. Make sure to communicate with your realtor as to what your needs and wants are. Also let them know what your must-haves and deal breakers would be, as that would give them a clear picture as to what you're looking for. When you do find a house that you like, make sure to ask your realtor for a CMA, which is a comparative market analysis. This will give you a clear picture of what the offer price would be. Which takes us to the next step, the offer process and negotiation. Let me break it down for you. Once you've done your CMA, this will give you a clear idea of what your offer price is going to be, along with a few critical dates. The next step would be to decide what the deposit amount is going to be. Now, typically the deposit amount is around 2 to 3% of the purchase price, which will go towards your down payment in the end. And I wouldn't recommend going under the 2% mark, as this would not show your commitment when buying the house. And after that's done, you'll have to communicate with your realtor as to what's to be included. Now this can be appliances, fixtures, furnitures, and even chandeliers if you think the chandeliers goes well with the house. And the last step when writing an offer is to include all the conditions required. These are typically finance and inspection, but you can also include other conditions such as status certificate review for condos, well and septic inspection for rural properties, and a whole lot more. Make sure to communicate with your realtor as to what your concerns are and how to mitigate them, because if you do miss this step, it can cost you thousands of dollars in the future. On a side note, I would also encourage that you ask your realtor for any additional expenses which you may incur, such as hot water tank rentals, security systems, utility costs, and property taxes. So I would advise that you ask your realtor to be well informed. Now that the offer is put together, this brings us to the most stressful part, negotiations. If you've done your research properly, and if your realtor has given you proper advice, then this should be a breeze. And if for some reason you're not able to narrow down a price, then make sure to ask your realtor for another comparable to help you along the way. Now, something worth mentioning here is the time frame when it comes to all the conditions. Inspections are done within 5 business days. Finance should take around the 5 to 7 business day mark, as sellers usually expect a shorter window when it comes to the conditional period. Now that the offer is drafted, the negotiations done, and the offer is accepted, you'll find yourself in the next step, the conditional period. Now, conditional period, like I mentioned before, are usually 5 to 7 business days. This is where the agreement of purchase and sale, APS as we call it, would be sent to your lawyer and your mortgage agent for review. It is imperative that you communicate with your realtor, your lawyer, and your mortgage agent so every detail is looked into. This is also a stage where you'll be hiring an inspector to inspect the house. And if you don't already have an inspector, make sure to ask your realtor for who they would recommend. And on a personal note, it can be overwhelming during the day of inspection, as inspectors usually point out all the cons of the house and not the pros. And something to note is that for any reason you're getting delayed, you can always ask for an extension to fulfill those conditions. More often than not, the sellers usually accept, as they would like to sell the house. Once you've wrapped up all the conditions and are satisfied with the findings and you've decided to buy the house, this is where we sign the notice of fulfillment. This will take us to the last step, which is closing procedures. And this step is where the lawyers usually do the heavy lifting, from processing the mortgage paperwork to transferring the property from the sellers to you. Any additional down payments, deposits, land transfer tax, and fees are usually processed in this day. And to go back on the example of buying a house for $750,000, here's a typical example of what an average cost would be. I hope this video helped you understand the basics of what to expect when buying a house. And if you'd like to learn more, make sure to subscribe down below and hit the like button while you're at it. And if you plan on buying or selling a house in the Ottawa region, then make sure to reach out in the links down below to book an appointment with me.